Hi guys, welcome to this series where we are going to be looking at Moad. So Moad is a program that I developed. It stands for Methods of Academic Development, precisely because my argument when it comes to university, which is where Moad is designed to operate, students don't necessarily fail or don't exclusively fail because of lack of content or lack of intelligence. No, the argument that I'm putting forward is that students fail because of a lack of orientation. Now, what I mean by a lack of orientation is that if we were to look at what typically happens in the context of a classroom or a lecture room, for that matter, you immediately see that the contact time isn't just between the professor or the lecturer and the student, but we also have tutorials, and for those others they create study groups, and so you are always going to be in the presence of content. The challenge isn't that you don't have enough content. Argument I'm making is you actually don't have the correct orientation regarding how you're supposed to handle that content. And so Moad as a program was designed to fit into that narrow conceptualization that tries to rectify some of the challenges that we are seeing that university students have, not by providing them with more content, but with orienting them towards how they ought to start to be when it comes to university education. And this is primarily the reason why my biggest foundational epistemic move is to suggest that what we actually need in university as students develop is academic formation. Now, we are going to be unpacking all of these issues and more, but suffice it to say, for you to understand where I'm actually going with this, what I mean by academic formation, take, for example, seminary. If you've ever been to seminary, which I have, you will immediately be confronted by a tension that exists between what you are learning and how that is meant to make you a particular kind of Christian. So, for example, when you go through your spiritual or Christian formation courses, which typically last you the entire duration of your degree, what you are meant to do is to reflect on the kind of thoughts, the kinds of acts, and the kind of spiritual disposition that you need to possess in order for you to be a good Christian. And now the reason why I talk about attention is that on the one hand, there is the theory of what you're supposed to learn about what it means to have a spiritual formation, but on the other hand, you are actually supposed to inhabit the elements that you are learning about spiritual formation. And for me, the way that I approach the whole of university learning is we are actually being transformed into becoming particular kinds of individuals, and it is those kinds of individuals with a particular slant in their academic personality, if you will, in what they actually do and in how they actually think. All of these things are meant to be cultivated in you, even though the university doesn't always expressly state that that is what they're actually going for. And so Moad, at its core, is it addresses that fundamental argument of mine, which is failure is a misalignment in epistemic orientation rather than a lack of content, is actually undergirded by my strive towards academic formation. And so all of the students that I work with and all of the students that I'm going to be working with in the future need to be prepared to go through a process of intense reorientation, which culminates in academic formation. Now, over the course of 12 sessions, where I am going to be having these episodes with you guys, which are literally just a video diary of me unpacking what Moad actually is at its core. This is merely meant to provide you with a deeper understanding of the philosophy behind Moad, what it tries to accomplish, who it is for, how it accomplishes what it tries to accomplish. So this is not necessarily the Moad program as it is, but this is more my intention to give you a deeper understanding of what it is, so that you understand what Moad is and how it names that which the university does not name. Now, the purpose of this initial recording, this initial, not even an episode, introduction, if you will, is to give you a very broad scope of what Moad is going to be looking at, and in fact what we are going to be looking at throughout the 12 sessions that we are going to be here together. So the one most important thing that I want you guys to understand, so first and foremost, Moad has 4 stages, and each and every one of those stages deals with something that is quite particular and quite pertinent to your journey of academic formation. And so the first stage, preoccupation, is with reorientation. So as I had said before, we as we look at why students fail and how students are failing, my argument is it's epistemic realignment that is required more than drilling down on particular content. Now, don't get me wrong. What I'm not saying is that all failure is as a result of misalignment in orientation, but I am saying part of what we need to be looking at, other than drilling down on content, is epistemic reorientation. So stage 1, literally targeting first and second year students, will focus exclusively on that reorientation. And as we talk about reorientation, we talk about how there has to be a movement from our high school based thinking to university based thinking. But in order for us to engage in university based thinking, we actually need to understand what kind of an animal the university is. We're also going to look at the differences between the school and the university. So I know right now we are in that season where a lot of students are neck deep in registration. They've just made it to university. A lot of students passed with extremely flying colors and they managed to make it into university. Others not so much, but they did well enough to go into tertiary education. But what I'm here to say is that the battle that you won against high school actually presents or insidiously hides a flaw in your thinking, precisely because you get to tertiary education and you assume it is just like school but with higher stakes. And that is the biggest myth there is, and that is the biggest flaw, precisely because the very fact that you passed your high school with flying colors gives you that false sense of hope, or that false sense of what works, precisely because you did it and you used your methodology of studying, of reading, of learning, of understanding, and it worked. And so it gave you those 8-9 distinctions. It gave you that bachelor's pass. It gave you that diploma pass. And so you are in tertiary right now on account of all of that. But what is required in order for you to actually pass going forward is something that is totally different to what made you pass in high school in the first place. So in other words, what we're saying is what got you here is not what's going to take you forward. You need a radical realignment, a radical reorientation of your thought process, because university is not an extension of high school in terms of the methods of study. University actually is a unique cultural experience where we are not just looking at the university curriculum as a whole, but we are also looking at the hidden curriculum of the extended life of a student at university. And so by all accounts, university is not the thing that most of you guys are thinking it's going to be. Now, I'm not going to make the blanket argument of saying, as you are entering into first year, you have no clue what it is. No, because my understanding is there are those of you who genuinely do know. And this is what later stages are actually going to be talking about. The very uneven understanding of the requirements of university, not only of the work that you're supposed to do, but of you as an individual, actually yields unfair advantages. So the very fact that our knowledge of what universities require is uneven actually necessarily produces unfair advantages. And these unfair advantages are actually by design. So I am going to be taking you through some of my own views of the university space and some of the absurd things that universities actually do, and some of them are going to be extremely difficult to hear, but I ask you to listen as much as you can and take what makes sense to you, and the rest of it, well, let's just say it is more information, even though it doesn't necessarily do you the kind of justice that you require. But again, this is also the hallmark of university, because we are not necessarily giving you information. We are asking you to engage with that information in ways that you haven't done up until you've started university. So in high school, you had your own unique way of dealing with information, precisely because you approached not just your textbooks, but your teachers as well as containers of knowledge, and therefore what the teacher says goes. But not so in university, and these are some of the issues that we are going to be grappling with. So we are going to be looking at orientation in the first stage, and we are also going to be looking at perception in your second stage. So by perception, what we mean, or what I mean, is you're going to have to develop a sight for argument, because argument is one of those things that we are going to be talking about a lot. But not just us. Whatever degree you're enrolled in, argument is something that you are going to get a taste of. And now you might think that, but wait, I am doing physics, or I am doing mathematics, and there's probably no need for argument. Isn't argument something that is solely for the humanities? Not so, because when we talk about argument and argument sight, your ability to actually detect what the argument is, this literally deals with your ability to understand one central truth. And that central truth is, in university, problems are not found. And when we talk about problems, I don't mean some of the problems that you're facing, financial, academic, or otherwise. No. But when we talk about academic problems within a research space, these are not found, they are developed, they are cultivated. When one is becoming a serious thinker in their field, they cultivate a problem that they are going to spend as much as 20 years solving. So just because you are doing physics, or just because you are doing mathematics, does not necessarily mean you don't have an argument. So that kind of mathematics that you're developing, or that kind of problem that you are arguing, you're looking at how other people have done it in the past. That in itself is an argument. And so in stage 2, we are looking at perception, where we are looking at argument sight. So are you able to detect what an argument is? And then in stage 3, we are going to be looking at synthesis and disciplinary thinking. So this is where we move beyond your ability to detect an argument in a text, and to actually contextualize those arguments within a much larger disciplinary framing. So when we talk about synthesis and disciplinary thinking, we are saying every assignment that you are starting to write, you are now engaged in a disciplinary conversation. And so if you're engaged in a disciplinary conversation, the argument becomes, how do you step into that space? How do you get into a space where a conversation has been raging for eons before you got there? And how do you begin to recognize your own deficiencies as you enter that space? How then do you begin to have contributions and thoughts of your own? Because yes, academic gatekeepers always tell you, beyond, or at least before you get to a particular threshold, you don't know anything, and therefore you cannot be a source. But we need to have a very measured approach of what they actually mean when they say that, because taken way too literally, it actually prevents your ability to formulate your own arguments, which is something that you're supposed to be able to do starting even as early as first year. So you need to have this kind of knowledge that other people have been in this space and they have been saying a lot of things, but even though people have already been saying or engage in this conversation, does not necessarily abscond you of that responsibility of having your own views. But now the issue is, how do you present your views in a space where other people more credible than yourself have already been engaged in conversations? We are trying to get you to enter into this productive space where you are supposed to hold your own against giants in the field, because by training you in university, by teaching you, and by providing you with all of this knowledge and content, we are positioning you as the future producers of knowledge. And how you are supposed to think of university is as an apprenticeship. Now, for those that might not know what apprenticeship is where you learn on the job training. So you are on the job in university studying the things that you're studying, and yet precisely because you are on the job, there are certain things that you ought to be learning. And the challenge that we are encountering, and the challenge that Moad is trying to challenge, is the very absence of the knowledge that you are being trained on something. And it is only the select few that understand that you are being trained that are actually going to make it. And so Moad is here to say, you know what? This is how it is. Let's put all our cards on the table and call them for what they are. And stage 4, the most important and developmentally, incrementally, when we talk about stage 4, it is designed more for your master's students, PhD students, postdocs, as well as other early career academics, those that have just finished their PhDs and their postdocs, and they're still trying to figure out who they are. Now, there is a claim that I want to make, and that claim is that I'm not necessarily saying that people that ultimately get their PhDs, that are doing their masters, that are in their postdoc and are early career academics, are clueless as to what it is that they're doing. No. How I want you to approach stage 4 of Moad, if you are in any of those categories, is more as an accountability protocol. And the reason I say this is because as we are battling for publish or perish, we tend to overlook what we are actually doing as we are publishing. And so I remind you of this by asking you the question: are you actually taking responsibility and ownership for the judgment that you are exercising as you publish, as you go through your master's thesis? Because at this level, we are now relinquishing the honors of the production of knowledge to you, starting at master's level. And this is also something that tends to plague most of our master's students, because they tend to see master's education as being just a mere extension of what they have been doing in their honors. And they are actually not recognizing the fact that at master's level, you actually know enough to publish and to produce original ideas. Now, this is not necessarily the thinking that we are always possessing, because when I was doing my honors, the ideas that were always circulating is, guys, don't reinvent the wheel. At honors level, we just need to figure out if you know the research cycle and how it goes. And so pick the simplest topic that doesn't require you to do any of the heavy lifting. Now, I'm not saying that this is wrong. It is correct to a point. But where I feel it betrays us is if we fail to move beyond that kind of thinking when we get to honors and when we ultimately get to PhD, or when we get to masters and when we ultimately get to PhD level. Because then at PhD level, you are merely looking for a topic that is easy enough, complex enough, without having to do much of the heavy lifting that a PhD requires, and in order for you to just get the title of doctor. Now, all of this is highly problematic, and Moad comes in and it demands judgment. Judgment is also one of those concepts that we are going to be looking at, and we are going to talk about a lot. And by academic judgment, what I merely mean is that you need to take the responsibility of your thoughts, your actions, the parameters of your thinking. You need to take control of the arguments that you put forward, and you need to figure out whether those arguments are able to stand on your own thinking outside of the literature that you have read. If we strip away all of that literature, is your research still able to stand and have authority based on how it is seeing the world, as well as how it is relating with the discipline? Because a lot of arguments are propped up way too much by literature, to the extent that if you remove that literature, the entire argument crumbles. How do you manage to enable your own argument to stand on its own 2 feet? Of that is what judgment is all about. When you are now taking control, grabbing that bull by its horns, and you are staking a claim as an academic at the precipice of the production of knowledge, because you are about to make a methodological, conceptual, theoretical contribution to the discipline. And so when I look at all of that, when I look at you as a PhD student who's busy in the throes of writing their proposal, are you able to produce an argument that is not only sound but nuanced? But also there's a fallacy of nuance where we over romanticize what it means to come up with original material, because originality comes in many shapes and forms. So what exactly does it actually mean, and how can we actually leverage originality, critical thinking, and a uniqueness of perspective in order for us to deliver something that is not only new, but something that ushers in your own particular perspective on how the discipline needs to understand the argument according to you. So if this sounds fun for you, this is something that you're definitely going to enjoy. So beyond this, we are going to be looking at the 12 sessions, and in those sessions we are going to unpack all of this and more, and I take you through my thinking and the philosophy that undergirds, that forms the foundation for Moad, and you and I are going to have a bit of fun. But I will see you in the very first episode that is coming right up. Thank you for joining me. Ta-ta.